What happens to people who are not loved by their own mother? Larry Ray spent his entire life trying to gain the approval of the woman who gave birth to him. Unfortunately, this pursuit led to a tragic outcome. Today's story is about a man who decided to form a cult around his own name. Whether a difficult childhood was the reason for this, or whether he still wanted to prove something to his mother, is unknown. In this story, the lives of several people would never be the same again. Lawrence, or Larry Ray, was born in 1959 in Brooklyn, New York. Then his younger brother Carl joined the family. Larry's parents divorced almost immediately after the birth of their second child, and the boys moved in with their maternal grandparents. Larry's childhood was terrible. At the ages of 6 and 7, he was abused by his grandfather. His grandmother knew what was going on, but acted as if it were normal and did not try to stop her husband. Instead, she physically and verbally abused Larry with a whip at the slightest offense. This was not the only punishment for the young boy. Larry didn't even have a bed. He was forced to sleep on the wooden floor. He was also forbidden to open the refrigerator and spent most of the time simply hungry. Larry's younger brother Carl, on the other hand, was raised like a real prince. Although he lived in the same house, Carl was loved by everyone. He was the favorite. He had the most comfortable bed and round-the-clock access to any food. He was never abused or punished. Because of this difference in upbringing, the two brothers were pitted against each other. His grandparents made it clear that Carl was the favorite, and Larry grew up with resentment toward his brother throughout his childhood. Due to his age, he didn't realize that it wasn't Carl's fault at all. Larry's mother knew very well what was happening to her children, but did nothing about it. On the contrary, she supported her parents in believing that Larry deserved to be treated this way. His own mother despised her son. The fact is that she became pregnant with her first child when she was still a teenager. The birth of the child completely ruined her life, and she blamed Larry, an innocent baby, for everything. The mother resented Larry, neglected him completely, and did not like him. Therefore, she supported everything that went on in her parents' house. One night, Larry became very ill. He had a fever and a severe cough. His wheezing noises woke his grandmother. The older woman was angry that the boy was keeping everyone awake with his loud, unpleasant sounds. She grabbed Larry by the hair, dragged him outside, and locked the door. It was the middle of winter. The sick Larry, who was only wearing his pajamas, almost froze to death. He had to be hospitalized. Fortunately, he recovered. When the boy's father learned how he was being treated in his former mother-in-law's house, he took his son out of his mother's care. So, Larry spent the rest of his childhood in his father's house under far better conditions than with his grandparents. After he grew up, the young man joined the military, but left after only 19 days. However, he continued to maintain contacts with prominent military figures, including Marine General Charles Pittman and retired Marine Commandant General James L. Jones. At the age of 19, he committed an act that indicated a terrible childhood had not gone unrewarded. For whatever reasons, he returned to his heartless mother. He wanted to live by her side and had tried all his life to gain the love and approval of this woman. Everything Larry did in his adult life was an attempt to impress his mother. Without a college education, Larry somehow found a job as a stockbroker on Wall Street. A difficult childhood taught him to find a way out of every situation. It was a really decent job that was very well paid. Larry got money and made acquaintances with some very influential people. All his life, he had been searching for the respect he did not receive as a child and wanted to make his mother proud. But his mother didn't care about that. Then the young man bought an expensive Mercedes, lost weight, and got himself into excellent athletic shape. But even here, his mother was not impressed by the successes of her firstborn and tried to downplay all his achievements. Instead of talking about his accomplishments, she praised Carl and saw Larry only as a competitor. All these problems with his mother and attempts to gain respect played an important role in the further life of the young man. At the age of almost 30, Ray settled down and started his own family. He met a woman named Teresa, who became his partner. They had two beautiful daughters, Talia and Ava. When Larry had children, his career began to develop rapidly. He switched from his job on Wall Street to being a financial advisor for very wealthy and influential people in high positions. These included politicians, business owners, high-ranking military officials, and some rather dubious individuals with connections to the mafia. A member of the Genovese mafia family even attended Ray's wedding. During this time, in the mid-1990s, Larry earned a lot of money, opened several bars and nightclubs in New Jersey, and befriended Rudolph Giuliani, the then mayor of New York City, and Bernard Kerik, the police commissioner of New York City, who himself had connections to President George Bush. He trained and rode motorcycles. Many influential people in the state belonged to Ray's circle of acquaintances. He even began advising the CIA on some issues. Then he worked for a while in Russia, where he befriended the translator of the Soviet head of state, Mikhail Gorbachev, and arranged a meeting for him with a high-ranking U.S. official. Larry was also acquainted with the famous actor Robert De Niro. During Gorbachev's visit to the United States, Ray allegedly introduced the actor to Mikhail Sergeyevich. How did it happen that the boy who grew up in such circumstances could achieve something in this life? How did he manage to get into some of the most influential positions in the world? How could Larry work as a financial advisor without a proper education? There are no answers to these questions, but all this characterized Ray, who could speak so smoothly that people believed him. But unfortunately, the successful career did not last long. At the end of the 1990s, things went downhill for him. Larry became incredibly conceited and self-confident. He considered himself invincible because he had friends in influential positions and hoped that these friends would protect him in case of failure. But the world does not work the way Ray imagined it. Where there is power and a lot of money, everyone is on their own. No one in high positions would risk their career for a Larry. Trusting in his abilities, Ray nevertheless got involved in mafia-like financial fraud. He participated in illegal stock trading, insider information, and the like. At some point, that was no longer enough, and he decided to become an FBI informant. That is, Larry worked for both sides simultaneously. He did business with the mafia and, while making a lot of money, informed the FBI about the activities of criminal groups. Only in the intelligence department, he provided false information. But even here, Ray tried to gain advantages. He complained to the management that, as an informant, he began to be threatened by members of the mafia. The FBI installed a $10,000 security system in Larry's house. He hoped to protect himself in case members of the criminal organization found out because he was allegedly leaking information. Larry's arrogance was simply unbelievable. He got away with it, but he had miscalculated and his plan didn't work. When it became known that Ray was playing for both sides, he was immediately arrested. Naturally, Larry panicked and turned to his influential friends and politicians, the police commissioner and other government officials, to ask them to vouch for him. But all the important people immediately turned away because they did not want to ruin their own reputation through dubious friends. Finally, Larry was forced to make a deal. He did not go to prison, but received only 5 years of probation. But his life and reputation were ruined by his criminal record. Ray was especially angry with his friend Bernard Kerik, the police commissioner who did not intervene and prevent his arrest. Larry's problems were not over yet. His family life could not be described as happy either. During all this time, Ray cheated on his wife. He had an old girlfriend whom he had kept with him for years, and to top it off, he offered his girlfriend to colleagues, politicians, and influential people as payment for favors. Larry had complete control over her life and monitored her every move. If she broke his rules, there were serious consequences. Ray abused her both physically and verbally. The girlfriend wanted to leave Larry several times, but he threatened to send explicit photos of her to her parents, and she realized that Ray would stop at nothing. When his wife found out about his long-standing affair and what he was doing, she immediately filed for divorce. This happened almost at the same time as Ray's career was falling apart. Trouble doesn't come alone, because sometime later, Teresa, the ex-wife, entered into a relationship with Larry's brother Carl. This is certainly a strange decision by a woman, but that was the reality. Larry was beside himself with rage because he hated his brother, who had ruined his childhood, and the man began to slander his ex-wife. Both daughters were in Teresa's custody. Larry decided to tarnish his ex-wife's name and ruin her reputation. Just as his life had been ruined, the deeply offended man created several websites and blogs in which he published powerful accusations, claiming that Teresa had abused the children, which was not the case. Larry also began to brainwash the children and turn them against their own mother. He told Talia and her sister Ava how terrible Teresa was and how she had abused them as children, although nothing of the sort had happened. At least the girls themselves did not remember it. The eldest daughter, Talia, began to believe her father and hate her mother, especially now that Teresa was together with their Uncle Carl. Larry Ray was one of the most experienced and skilled manipulators the world has ever seen. Therefore, it was easy for him to convince his daughters that he was right. When Talia told her mother that she did not like the affair with Uncle Carl, Teresa reacted with an emotional slap. This explosive reaction of the woman served to make her children believe their father's stories. As a result, Talia became completely disillusioned with her mother and fell under Larry's influence, which he used to regain custody of the children. When Larry came one day to his ex-wife's house to pick up the girls, he seized upon a word that Teresa had accidentally said and began to beat her in front of their daughters. The woman was so frightened that she immediately called the police. When the police officers arrived, Larry managed to twist the situation so skillfully that it looked as if Teresa had insulted and hit him, and not the other way around. The man played the role of the victim very convincingly, and to make matters worse, Talia, his eldest daughter, supported his words. She was 15 years old at the time. The girl told the police officers that her mother had not only hit her father, but also her and her sister. An investigation was then launched, and Larry was temporarily granted custody of both girls. That was exactly what he wanted. In the following weeks, while investigations were ongoing, further lies and accusations were raised against Teresa. Talia accused her mother of physical abuse and harassment. She went so far as to slander her aunt and cousin. However, the facts showed that these accusations were false. The investigators also spoke with the younger daughter, Ava, and learned that the mother had never laid a finger on her children or hurt them. Ray had taught his daughters what to tell the authorities to accuse their mother of unworthy behavior. Finally, the police realized that it was manipulation on Larry's part and an attempt to mislead the authorities to obtain custody of the girls. Ray's whole story was nonsense. Therefore, he was ordered to return the children to Teresa's full custody. But Larry refused. Technically, this was considered kidnapping, since the man was on probation. His refusal to return the daughters to their mother was punished with a 6-month prison sentence. The younger Ava returned to her mother, but the older Talia did not like Teresa and believed the lies her father told her so much that she refused to return. She was in college at the time and lived in a dormitory. It was the year 2010. Larry was in and out of prison. Once, he attacked his girlfriend and pressed his hand over her mouth and nose, causing her breathing problems. Another time, he violated the conditions of his probation by simply failing to report to the police station. In 2010, Ray had just been released from custody and was on the verge of reuniting with his loyal daughter Talia, who was then a college student. At that time, the girl was studying at Sarah Lawrence College, which was located on the outskirts of New York. Humanities and arts were primarily studied there. During her first year at the institution, Talia found many friends with whom she was very open and on whose support she could fully rely. Talia was the leader of her group, and the other students listened to her. The girl loved to talk about her father, Larry Ray. At every opportunity, she started talking about him. According to Talia, Larry was the most wonderful father in the whole world. He worked on Wall Street, associated with many influential people, and was currently in prison on false charges. Talia's friends were really impressed because the girl praised Larry as a kind of Superman. She told them, under great secrecy, that the government had framed her father because he knew too much. Talia tried to portray him as a man who stood above the highest ranks. In the fall of 2010, the girl moved into her second year and, along with a group of friends, moved into a dormitory on campus. Just at that time, Talia received a call from her father from prison, informing her that he was about to be released and urgently needed a place to stay. The girl, who adored her father, immediately offered him the dormitory. She convinced Larry that they had enough rooms and that her friends would have no objection to his presence. Of course, it was a rather strange decision for a parent to live in a dormitory with his daughter and a bunch of other college students, but Larry didn't seem to be embarrassed in the slightest. Talia's roommates also had nothing against it. They were interested in getting to know such a prominent person as Larry Ray, as his daughter portrayed him. Besides, they thought it was only temporary. Larry was released from prison and moved into the dormitory where Talia and all her friends lived. He felt comfortable enough to stay on the couch in the common room. The dormitory was a 2-story building with several rooms housing 8 students. There were 4 girls, Talia, Isabella, Claudia, and Juliana, and 4 young men, Santos, Gabe, Max, and Dan. They were all 19 years old. Ray had no intention of moving out of the dormitory because there he found a grateful audience that listened to his stories from morning till night. The man eagerly told the students what an amazing person he was, that he had worked with the government and the CIA, that he had been a negotiator between the Russian and American governments, and that he had been instrumental in organizing meetings between the 2 nations. The students were impressed by what a powerful man lived with them and slept on the couch in the common living room. In addition to his evening self-glorification, Ray cooked meals for the students and cleaned the dormitory. It seemed as if he did it out of pure kindness and did not ask for payment for this care. But Ray did not do all this out of pure kindness. He was creating the conditions for fulfilling his greatest dream. Larry wanted to gain the students' trust, obligate them, and then manipulate them in the worst possible way. As soon as the man crossed the threshold of the dormitory, he began his intellectual games with people who had just become adults, and these games had devastating consequences. All the students were fascinated by Talia's father and his incredible stories, and followed every word he said while he filled their heads with lies. Larry told them that the government was after him and that his life was in danger. That's why they had put him in prison. The fact is that after his cooperation with the CIA, Ray knew many secrets about the catastrophe of September 11th, when 2 airplanes flew into the World Trade Center and killed many people. There are many theories about this, and Larry used one of them to confuse the students. And now he was being hunted to silence him forever. Allegedly, Larry had been observed several times being followed, and once a man in a passing car had shot at him, but missed. Ray remembered Police Commissioner Bernard Carrick, who did not want to intervene when he was arrested and decided to blame him for all his problems. He told the students that Bernard was his friend and had now turned into an enemy and wanted to kill him. Then Larry brought in the governor of New York and even President George Bush, who supposedly all wanted Larry dead because he knew their secrets. Ray's imagination was limitless, and he talked so much nonsense that any reasonable person would have doubted the accuracy of his words. But these were students who were not interested in politics and affairs of the state. They had heard the big names and felt respect for Larry. Of course, Ray lied, but only to gain trust and admiration in the eyes of the young people. In addition, the man showed the students pictures of himself in frames with various famous personalities, although the representatives of politics and business in reality did not know who was standing behind them. Larry is a man who is able to infiltrate the most influential circles, spot the camera, and then secretly stand up to get into the picture. Talia, who had been subjected to complete brainwashing by her father, supported him in everything. Larry had become almost like a messiah for this group of college students. He seemed to be an incredibly strong and intelligent man who stood up against a corrupt system and fought for what was right. When the stories about Larry himself were over, he continued to gather the students daily in the common living room and gave them lectures on things like truth and justice, the nature of the universe, the sun, the stars, the planets, religions, and the like. Larry then began taking the students for individual lectures, in which he revealed secrets he had learned at the CIA. At least that's what he said. Ray taught how to discipline the mind, how to overcome obstacles and traumas in one's life to reach one's full potential. This man had no qualifications as a psychotherapist or psychologist. He invented all the methods off the top of his head, but he knew what occupied young people at this age, and he was very good at hitting the sore spots. And he wasn't interested in all the students living in the house, but only in those who were easier to manipulate. In their eyes, Larry Ray was the only person who could help them understand themselves. The first person Larry focused on was Isabella. The man liked her very much. Isabella attended Sarah Lawrence College on a full scholarship. She had previously attended a Catholic girls' school and was very withdrawn. Shortly before Larry moved into the dormitory, the girl had gone through a tough breakup with her boyfriend and was now depressed. She was very insecure and withdrawn. Larry's increased attention pulled Isabella out of her depression. In one-on-one sessions, she poured out her heart to the man, told him her deepest and darkest secrets, and shared her problems with him. Larry moved his personal lectures into Isabella's bedroom. He laid the girl on the bed, cuddled up to her, stroked her hair, and whispered sweet things in her ear that no one should hurt his girl. He was in his early 50s, and Isabella was as old as his eldest daughter. Intimate conversations were followed by intimacy. Although the girl was old enough to make her own decisions, she was at that moment very vulnerable to realize what was really going on. Then Larry convinced Isabella to break off all relationships with her family and friends. He convinced the student that it was her parents who had made her so unhappy, who had abused her physically and emotionally as a child, and that he had come to save her. Larry was such a skilled manipulator that Isabella called her mother and father and told them she didn't want to know them anymore, and if they tried to meet with her, she would kill herself. When the students finally went home during the winter holidays, Isabella and Talia stayed in the dormitory with Larry. The man had arranged with one of his buddies that they could live in his one-bedroom apartment for a while, and he had achieved this through manipulation as well. And now he observed the students and considered whom he should take with him to the apartment besides Isabella. Larry's choice fell on Claudia. Claudia had also grown up in California. She was a smart, creative, independent girl, but she was suffering from depression at the time, and Larry offered to help her. She also had to participate in one-on-one sessions. As soon as Claudia began to communicate with Ray in private, she really transformed into a completely different person, became confident and liberated, and then told everyone that she was suffering from schizophrenia, and it was Larry who had diagnosed her, even though he had no background. Now, the circle of admirers of Larry Ray included 3 people: his daughter Talia, Isabella, and Claudia. But that was not enough for the man. He then turned to his next student, Santos. Santos, like Claudia, had mental health issues and was also struggling with depression. When he saw how positively Larry was affecting his roommates, he also began one-on-one sessions with the man. Not even a week later, the young man began to pour out his heart to Ray and show him his weaknesses. Santos revealed that he had attempted suicide in high school and that he was having problems again now. Around the same time, Santos began dating Talia, which is why he trusted her father unconditionally. Before he knew it, he was completely at the mercy of an adult man. And then he convinced his neighbor Dan, who had orientation problems, to ask Talia's father for help. Larry's sect had grown by another man. At this point, Ray had all the students under his control. He continued to give them daily lectures on religion and intimacy. When the summer holidays came, Larry convinced Claudia, Isabella, Dan, and Santos to stay with him over the summer in his apartment in New York City's Upper East Side. Unfortunately, their lives would never be the same after that summer, because Larry's sect was gaining more and more momentum. The 4 students moved into the apartment along with Talia, believing that they were doing this of their own free will. but there will have long since been broken. The young people themselves did not realize how they began to follow first the recommendations and then the orders of Ray. From the first day of their lives in this apartment, the students became absolutely dependent on their owner. There were only 2 rooms. Larry and Isabella occupied a separate bedroom, while the other 4 people were somehow accommodated in the living room. Ray also removed the locks and doorknobs in the bathroom so that no one could have their privacy anymore. He forced everyone to follow a strict diet to lose weight and clear their heads. And to control everything better, he installed locks on the refrigerator and freezer to prevent thefts. Everyone was starving and unable to concentrate, which made manipulation very easy. Every morning, the students were awakened very early with the same song and then had to do exercises. It was more like a military training camp, and Larry said he had been in the army and knew everything about life in the military. The only thing he forgot to mention was that he had only been in service for 19 days. Then he had the 5 students sit for hours in his lectures about all kinds of nonsense. Larry loved the sound of his own voice and could talk long and tirelessly about the most diverse topics. To suppress the young people's will, Larry began to drug them with illegal substances. When the students fell into an anxious and paranoid state, he forced them to sit in the living room and reveal their deepest and darkest secrets, wishes, and needs in life, to share intimate fantasies. He questioned them about their childhood, their psychological traumas, and everything bad that had ever happened in their lives. Larry managed to convince the students that everything was due to their parents. He invented traumas from their childhood and injected them so deeply into their minds that they really began to believe that it had actually happened to them once. The result of this psychological processing was a complete withdrawal from contact with their relatives. When the summer ended, the students did not return to campus. They continued to live with Larry in an apartment and commuted daily to lectures. When Ray saw their complete submission, he began to use them to his advantage. He used various control techniques, but the most basic technique was intimacy with the guru. That was exactly what this power-hungry man believed himself to be. Isabella was now held in the company of Claudia in bed games with Larry. Then he sent Isabella to Dan so that he could reveal his true orientation. Larry called it enlightenment lessons. He watched the young people during their intimate activities, sometimes gave instructions on how to do it, and sometimes joined in. His 20-year-old daughter slept in the next room on the couch. Larry Ray's sect had existed for about a year when a few more girls joined. They were the 2 sisters of Santos, Yalitza and Felicia Rosario. Yalitza, like her brother Santos, had complexes and was not in the best mental condition. Her brother persuaded her to go to Larry and told her how wonderful he was and how he had helped him change his life. When Yalitza arrived at the apartment one day, she stayed there. Felicia, however, was completely different. She lived in California. She was a graduate of Columbia University, had completed medical school, and wanted to begin an internship in a hospital. She had a large number of friends. Felicia was confident, cheerful, and active. She was on the fast track to success and not the typical victim that Larry sought. But when he saw this young woman, his eyes lit up. He wanted to have her at all costs. Felicia was independent enough. Moreover, she was about to work in another state. She would not be so easy to control. So Larry decided on a completely different approach. He had to adopt a waiting stance. He showered her with recognition and compliments, was always there for her, and Felicia considered him the most incredible man she had ever met. As soon as she reciprocated her feelings for Larry, he told her that the government wanted to destroy him, that he was being followed, and that someone had already tried to shoot him, and that now Felicia, his girlfriend, was also in danger. The only way to protect her was for her to move to New York and live with him in an apartment. But when Felicia did that, there was no longer any trace of the independent, cheerful person. She also fell completely under the influence of Larry's sect and became his second partner. For a leader can have several wives, or so Ray now called Felicia and Isabella. Every night, the girls had to spend the night with the guru in bed. Everyone had to be unclothed, and Felicia and Isabella also had to hold Larry's genitals all night. Additionally, he sent the students out and had them sleep with strangers. He recorded all these encounters on video or simply watched them. If any of the sect members began to resist or did not follow Larry's instructions, the man threatened to post the footage on the internet and send the files to their families. This whole group of students had to be supported somehow. Ray came up with a clever plan. Every day, he went through the apartment and checked if there was a new stain on the wallpaper or if one of the pans in the kitchen was scratched, and then accused a randomly selected victim of having caused the damage. Initially, the students tried to apologize, but Larry could get angry and pressure them all day. When their spirits were once again broken, they confessed to something they had not done, and then they also had to pay for the damage. These were astronomical amounts, bills over thousands of dollars. Santos, for example, received a bill of $50,000 for everything he had damaged. Felicia received a bill of over $160,000 because Larry accused the young woman of stealing money from his credit cards, even though she hadn't even touched them. But when she was told this for days, she began to believe she had actually stolen it. But where should poor students get money from? Of course, from their families, who had let them down. The followers of Larry demanded large sums from their parents under the threat of harming themselves. Thus, the relatives of the Rosarios had to transfer $300,000 to Ray's account to pay off their children's debts to this man. There were three things Larry used to control his subordinates: intimate relationships and the threat of exposing them, money and physical violence. When students stepped out of line, when they broke rules they didn't even know existed, when they angered Ray in any way, they were physically punished. The pseudo-guru simply beat his followers and abused them in every conceivable way. He forced men to wear women's clothing and watch adult films, and women to wear diapers and watch only children's shows on TV. And Ray also set up a website where he offered intimate services. For several years, he forced Claudia to sleep with men for money against her will. Of course, the woman herself did not see this money, although a considerable amount had accumulated over the years. After another round of abuse, Dan finally grew tired of enduring this and had the courage to leave the unhappy apartment. Dan was the first person to escape from Larry. Unfortunately, this happened when the man's psyche was completely destroyed. In 2013, the students graduated from college, and Ray moved with them into his stepfather's house in North Carolina. At that time, Talia, Isabella, Claudia, Yalitza, Santos, and Felicia were there. After Dan had left the sect, Larry feared that someone else might leave, so he began to pit the young people against each other. There was a group of favorites, which included Talia, Isabella, and Felicia, and a group of bad people, which included Santos, Claudia, and Yalitza. Somehow, Larry managed to convince Felicia that her brother and sister were jealous of her and wanted to poison her. The constant quarrels and the negative atmosphere led to many sect members ending up in the hospital because they had tried to kill themselves. The parents learned of the suffering of their adult children. They repeatedly turned to the police. Unfortunately, the law enforcement agencies could not do anything because at that time, all members of Larry's sect were adults and acted of their own free will. The police even traveled to the house in North Carolina, but the former students assured them that they were not being held there by anyone, and the patrol officers left empty-handed. This madness continued for several years. Larry Ray's sect members moved from one house to another until one day Santos, followed by his sister Yalitza, left their spiritual mentor. They found the strength to leave the man who humiliated them and completely suppressed their will. Larry's daughter Talia, unlike the others, was never subjected to harsh treatment. She came and went as she pleased. She truly believed in her father's power and saw nothing wrong with what he was doing. Isabella, Felicia, and Claudia remained loyal to Larry for a long time and remained his puppets, doing what he said. Claudia worked as an escort against her will for 5 years, and in October 2018, she finally refused to sleep with men for money. Larry punished her harshly by taking her to a hotel room, stripping her naked, tying her to a chair, placing a plastic bag over her head, and repeatedly cutting off her oxygen supply for the next few hours until she lost consciousness. Then he cut off her hair to further humiliate her. After this incident, Claudia did not return to Larry's group and left the sect forever. From that point on, things began to fall apart. Talia no longer lived with her father. Dan, Santos, and Yalitza had left the man earlier. His two so-called wives, Isabella and Felicia, remained with him. In 2019, the cult around Larry Ray collapsed, and an article in New York Magazine helped with that. A journalist named Ezra Marcus was a graduate of Sarah Lawrence College. During his studies, he came across rumors about a strange group of students led by an adult man. Ezra was fascinated. To get to the bottom of the story, he interviewed former students who had lived with Larry Ray in the dormitory, and he also managed to find former sect members and learn the details of the case. Ezra Marcus's article shocked the world. It spread on the internet and eventually prompted the authorities to take a closer look at Larry Ray. In February 2022, the house in New Jersey where Larry, Felicia, and Isabella lived was searched by the FBI. Ray was arrested and charged with several crimes, including human trafficking for intimate services, physical abuse, extortion, tax evasion, and various other financial offenses. Although Larry was taken into custody, Isabella and Felicia continued to believe in his innocence and remained loyal to him. Only some time later did Felicia begin to understand what was really going on. She had to rethink her whole life, and Isabella preferred to be an accomplice rather than testify against Ray. In February 2023, Larry and Isabella were put on trial. By that time, all the details of the sect had been revealed. Many of the former members testified against Larry. Some videos were also released. Ray was diagnosed with a dramatic and narcissistic personality disorder. This man was able to manipulate and control almost any situation he was in, a psychologist stated. His lawyers tried to portray him as a victim, as an old, sick man, but the jurors did not buy these tricks. Larry Ray was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life imprisonment. Isabella was found guilty of aiding and abetting conspiracy and sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. She still does not speak to her family because she believes they are to blame for all her problems. Larry's eldest daughter, Talia, was also suspected of conspiring with her father, but was never charged. Since then, she has completely disappeared from the scene. No one knows where she is, and nothing more is known about her. The former sect members had to rebuild their shattered psyches, and that was very difficult. Thanks to their parents and psychologists, they managed to overcome some problems, but unfortunately, their lives will never be the same again. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves.